Okay, welcome to the second episode of DMPG's Fireside Chats. We're going to be talking about the value of customer data platforms this week, and with me today I have
Will Taplin, Head of Solutions Architecture at DMPG.
And you guys know me, co-owner, Managing Director of DMPG. So let's get straight into it, Will.
Yeah.
What actually is a customer data platform? Because everyone claims to be a CDP. What actually is it in your opinion?
Yeah, I think most broadly it's a system that's bringing in multiple data sources to create a single customer view. And then it's also a system that's going to allow that data to be shared with external systems for activation or insight purposes. I suppose that from a business perspective, you would hope from a CDP that you're able to support marketing and sales efforts and really help to improve customer experiences because you have a richer profile that's built in a CDP so that you can orchestrate journeys more effectively, have more dynamic and advanced personalization, and just have a better understanding of the customer.
Okay. So why do you think there's been an explosion of CDPs over the last few years? Like, a number of years ago, it used to be a relatively small number. You would have potentially Tedium Audience Stream, you had Treasure Data, Segment and Particle. But now I think the list is over 100 different technologies. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think the last report on the CDP Institute was over 160 vendors that are defined by their own definition. But I think the explosion is partly because everyone's calling themselves a CDP, as you say. But
so sort of jumping on a bandwagon. You think a lot of it is that as well?
There is that, I think, but and because it's the buzzword, obviously people are trying to position themselves as CDP, whereas in reality a lot of these platforms have CDP features. They can bring in multiple data sources, they can unify on and identify, and they might be able to activate to certain external systems, but certainly not fully featured. I think in the industry, though, there are several factors that I think have caused that explosion, where we look at things like legal and regulatory changes.
You're talking about GDPR, you're talking about issues with ITP as well, CCPA,
correct.
that kind of stuff, yeah?
Yeah, and I think those have obviously all been designed and developed to try to improve consumer and customer privacy, but it has also caused businesses or forced businesses to start thinking about the first-party data strategies more so. And I think whilst Europe's been more heavily focused on doing that, we are seeing it globally as well, with more countries starting to tighten up the type of regulations that they're introducing. And again, just moving businesses towards considering what they can do with first-party data more so, and the CDP is perfect for using that first-party data to unify and activate on it.
Okay, so you alluded to this point actually, in that not all CDPs are created equal. You mentioned some are kind of got CDP capabilities, but they're not necessarily what you would consider a CDP. So actually, are they made differently? What are the core differences? And really, for anyone watching this, what should they be thinking about when it comes to a CDP? Right? Actually, what should the key components be?
Yeah, I think from a high level, the top features that you expect from a CDP, as we touched on at the start, is we expect that a CDP can bring in data from multiple data sets.
In any format?
I guess that is where it starts to differ, right? So we have CDPs that will take raw data in, and you can transform that data, make it usable within the CDP system to build out profiles and audiences and then push out to other systems. We have others, though, that require a strict schema, so that all of the data transformation happens before ingestion of the data, and then obviously once it's in that strict schema, then it can be used in the same
so that's
way.
kind of like feature one, decision path A and B, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay.
And I think also within that ingestion piece, there's timing considerations that make them quite different, because of all the established vendors, those more capable vendors that we see, most of them can ingest large volumes of data with no trouble. But I think that there is a slight difference when you start looking at how the timing affects the ingestion and then the processing of the data to make it available.
So just talk through that a little bit, what you mean by timing.
Yeah, so within the CDP ingestion process, we may be able to dump a huge file of data with many hundreds of thousands of records at once.
Mm-hmm.
And again, these vendors will be able to, well, a lot of these vendors can do that, but actually there's timing within their processes to when they take that data and actually start processing it, to start the stitch processing,
Right.
or starting to build out profile attributes and things like that you might have configured in the CDP, but there's delays that might occur from that initial ingestion point through to the processing
Right.
part.
And is that a kind of subjectivity point of the concept of real time? In that real time for some people means seconds, for some it means minutes, for some it means hours, but they still use it in the same context, but actually it has a very significant impact on everything thereafter.
Yeah, definitely, and I think we certainly see real-time capabilities differ across all of the vendors that we work with.
And it's even within certain features, right? In the
Exactly,
you have like processing times for different aspects as opposed to just being one concept, right?
Yeah, absolutely, and that can really start to limit or guide, however you want to look at it, the use cases that you're implementing, because you may have certain data that we can only actually build audiences from and use as trigger points for your initial trigger activation experience.
Yeah, okay.
Based on real-time data actually captured within same hit and within a few seconds, allowing for, say, same page personalization. But for others, it may follow a process that we can't actually access a full profile of data alongside interactions that have happened at that moment in time that we're expecting to be able to do in real time.
Yep.
And so again, it just limits potentially the type of experience that you might want to build out for those real-time capabilities.
Okay, so we've got the ingestion, we've got the workflow, essentially the data workflow and speed of that. And what are the other kind of key components then?
I think just to touch on the last point of the speed, it gets compounded further with the actual experience delivery platform as well. So it really is important to consider how real-time is real-time of these vendors, because with some of the experience delivery platforms, there's also a delay in which they can start using the data. So we can have a point where even if data is made available quickly, we can find that those experience delivery platforms might not actually be able to, push a personalized experience on site or push out emails and retarget on paid media platforms.
And you're talking about the sort of the bigger ecosystem now, whereby the CDP is feeding tools like testing and personalization tools, email systems, going into ad networks, and actually how that can receive data, how that can receive triggers, and it's not just actually what those tools are capable of, that's a big piece, but actually what is the capability of the connection between the CDP and that tool, how well established is that?
Yeah,
right?
That's right. And I think it's such an important part of the understanding of the capability of the CDP with timing considerations alongside the combination of those delivery platforms, because that will guide you in the types of use cases and the scope of use cases that you want to deliver through them.
Okay. And what about the range of connections that you can then activate the data on? Is that kind of key consideration, or is it much of a muchness because they can be built out within the tools?
Yeah, again, that's another area where there's a huge variation we see in vendors. Again, some of the more established vendors, we see huge libraries of out-of-the-box connectors. But within those, again, we've often found that actually we've had to build out custom integration because, yes, they market an out-of-the-box solution for integrating into your personalization, on-site personalization tool, but actually they're using an API that doesn't actually allow you to do creation of a new record and update a profile record in that system for personalization. Right. There's quite a specific example that I'm thinking of, but it's quite different. And then those out-of-the-box integrations also differ in terms of the functionality of custom integrations as well that the platforms offer to allow the businesses themselves to build out. So where those out-of-the-box integrations don't exist, a lot of the vendors still allow you to be able to develop your own integrations and therefore still push out data to the systems you need to. But there are vendors that don't allow that, so you are totally reliant on those vendor engineering teams to build out the integrations for you, and of course that increases lead times, that increases cost, and everything else that goes along with sort of a loss of control over an integration into a system that you may see as key.
Interesting.
for that.
Okay. So we've spoken quite a lot about the data and the technology will get to people. Process and whether a CDP should have orchestration capability, journey orchestration capability, kind of workflows, trigger workflows, and the kind of if this then that kind of scenario. Key feature or optional feature in your view?
I think a full journey orchestration tool isn't a key feature to define a CDP, but I think it's a massive add-on for those CDP vendors that offer a full journey orchestration tool, because ultimately we're looking to buy and invest in a system that is going to allow teams to more effectively, more efficiently build out these advanced, personalised journeys across all of a business's touch points. And obviously the more capable the solution is of doing that, then the more effective those business teams can do that. So I would argue that it's certainly a huge enhancement of the vendor to have that capability, but I think strictly speaking it's not a necessity to define them as a CDP if they don't have that journey orchestration tool. I mean, a lot of the vendors we see where they don't have a full journey orchestration tool will at least have journey orchestration features, so you might be able to do some kind of frequency capping or prioritization of actions. But certainly the more capable systems on that side of things will allow for way more complex journeys to be built out and sort of cross-team initiatives that could be implemented for those teams.
Okay, so we've learned a lot about the key components of a CDP, but actually, is a CDP right for a business, right? What are the conditions by which it would actually make sense for a business to warrant having a CDP?
Yeah, I guess it really touches on those core features of the CDP. So, for example, businesses that have multiple data sets, maybe because they have a whole host of technologies that across their entire marketing product teams that they're trying to use, and therefore they have these disparate sets of customer data that give them partial understanding of the customer profile, but really there is that desire to start stitching that together to get that fuller and rich profile, single profile view.
And what does single profile view mean to you, though? Because this whole piece about stitching is all related to privacy as well, and it's related to actually the key features and differences in the CDP. So let's just touch on stitching. What does that actually mean to you?
Yeah, so that's how a customer records start to be brought together, and the data, the context and the data that's tied to that individual record from a system gets put and joined with another data set. So for example, we might have CRM records relating to a customer profile that we want to join with loyalty programs or past sales data or
even in store or call center, web data, app data.
Exactly, And therefore there's a requirement of all CDPs to run through a stitching process where they can evaluate the identifiers across those data sets and start bringing them together. So again, one of the key differences between vendors is all of them or most of them, if you're a CDP you should be able to do this, but do some deterministic matching where you take an identifier and you're looking for the exact same value in another data set to do that exact match.
So be it like a phone number or an email address or an account ID, it's always that kind of that's what you're looking for, right?
Exactly.
Right, okay.
And then we can start to bring those two records into one, obviously joining those two together. But other vendors out of the box also have probabilistic matching or fuzzy matching, where there isn't the exact match identifiers available. So their matching algorithms will look at various data points that might identify the customer, and depending on the degree of sort of the match rate that they're looking for, start to tie and join records together based on several data points where there's a good indication that these two records look to be the same person or whatever type of profile we're trying to build out. And then on that side of matching and stitching, there's really a degree of control we see in the vendors that provide probabilistic matching and how much you can control those algorithms that do the stitching. You know, we might have scenarios where
sort of set how loose they can be.
Exactly.
With it. Right. Okay.
Yeah, we might have, you know, there may be use cases that ultimately you're doing a very broad marketing campaign, actually matching, perfect record to record isn't that important because we've got this broad outreach piece, and if we're a little bit out on the personalisation side, it's not really going to impact the customer experience.
Yeah.
But of course, we're investing in a CDP to start doing much more personalised and relevant sort of outreach to customers and improve their experience. So ultimately, I think with a lot of the use cases that we're looking to build are using that deterministic matching and using probabilistic to enhance it further. Starting to piece those together.
But that is all somewhat reliant on those IDs even being available in the first place to move beyond device level personalisation, right? You don't need CDPs for device level personalisation, right? You can do that directly in the tools. So how much actual onus is on the customer or the client, essentially, who's buying the CDP, to make those IDs available? Because I feel like that's often missed. It was kind of glossed over by salespeople from a CDP perspective. You know, they talk about how amazing the stitching capability is and how amazing all these match records are, but you still need the IDs somewhere. They need to be surfaced somewhere.
Yeah.
And so surely that is a key kind of consideration for customers, right, who are thinking of buying CDPs.
Definitely. I think, you know, that's absolutely crucial to the planning of what you want to achieve with the CDP, because ultimately if we have data sets that don't have a customer identifier that we can match with, and the vendor doesn't have a stitching process that can handle these data sets without the identifiers that you would need for the deterministic match, then you're working with a pretty loose set of data that's not ultimately going to create this personalised experience or cross-journey capability that we want to see from a CDP. So absolutely crucial part of a CDP investment planning, I suppose.
So that one needs to be sort of all built into the whole customer experience strategy. Is how we're actually going to encourage or incentivize the customer to give us some kind of identifier, be it a phone number, an email, or whatever. Right? It's just something that we can actually use to stitch to add the value to the CDP. I think that's often missed. Actually.
Yeah, and particularly we see that with the on-site kind of data collection side of things. I suppose with CRM records, we'd almost always expect to see some kind of unique identifier, account ID or email address, but on-site, as you say, a lot of the time there's just a reliance on cookie identifiers, device identifiers, that teams may not have thought in the past how other technologies have worked to try to have that unique view of at best of a customer, but really it's just the device. So surfacing an identifier that we can use as that matching key is really important. And obviously on site we would normally be pushing that to a data layer as that single source single source of that data point.
Yeah, okay. And you mentioned customer, and I want to just touch on that a little bit more, because for B2B, a customer isn't necessarily thought of in exactly the same way, because a lot of B2B environments, they have very broadly, and there's a lot of different variations of this, but very broadly, they have a concept of buyers and influencers, where the influencers are the ones that are having all the kind of behaviour, but then they're pushing this, ultimately the information to the buyer to make the purchase. So you've now got to have a one-to-many relationship at the customer level. Is that being addressed by CDPs as well? And to what extent?
Again, another defining feature or differentiating feature, I suppose, of the vendors that we see, that where some of them are fully capable of building out those structural, hierarchical profile structures, where we have potentially many levels to it as well. We might have a customer that is an entire corporation. Within that, though, we've got divisions, subdivisions, individual companies and business units of those, and obviously that creates this really complex relationship within the customer record itself. And obviously I guess the main goal here is that in those more complex scenarios, we're hoping to be able to get insights and also activate on both the grouped profile of those individual contact points, but then also at the individual level specifically too.
Yeah.
And so, again, a very full-featured CDP will allow that pretty much out of the box. I say out of the box, there's still lots of integration,
So
but configuration that goes into it.
Sure.
But certainly one of those differentiating factors of a CDP.
And do you think that actually the B2B have got something quite interesting to work with here, in that actually from a B2C perspective, people don't really think about buyer and influencer relationships in that way. But actually, surely it exists a lot more than people realise. Like, for example, I bought a gel gun the other day. I didn't even know what a gel gun was.
No,
my son, wanted me to buy it from his pocket money.
Yeah.
So he'd done all the research. He'd spent the time looking at it.
Yeah.
I just went in and bought it.
Yeah.
Right. That's B2C. Surely this buyer-influencer relationship exists there as well. And actually, there's potentially a lot of additional capability and functionality that even consumer businesses should be thinking about.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think. Perfect example that you've given there, really. But the household within that B2C environment is really a really important factor when we consider it. That scenario, or gifting, I suppose, within a household as well. We've got a client at the moment with selling very high-end footwear, and they're always saying that customers are buying a pair of their boots, and then coming home with that, and the partner desperately wants also a pair of these boots, and they're showing that they're starting to engage with that brand, starting to interact with touch points, and hoping as a gift they'll obviously get this pair of boots. I think it's absolutely relevant. I think the whole influencer buyer scenario applies very, very commonly in B2B, but almost as commonly in B2C for a lot of
but a lot
shops.
of CDPs aren't addressing this yet, are they?
No, I think having that focus on understanding this joined customer record of a household or a grouping of some kind, I don't think it's necessarily an out-of-the-box feature that's necessarily available or discussed, because I suppose it is...
It's the complexity of it, probably.
Exactly, the focus on delivering that individual customer profile record with this deterministic match covers, say, 80% of your, the whole 80-20 rule covers 80% of your use cases, but could be further enhanced way more if you could, use those features to start joining a household together or a group of buyers together.
Yeah. Okay, so we've learned a lot about the capabilities of CDPs, what they should do, how they should work, the kind of features they should have. Let's just talk a little bit actually about the value of CDPs, and then let's also talk about why they go wrong. So from a value perspective, what would you say actually is the extent of the value that they could deliver? And I stress the could part.
Yeah, we've seen it all, I feel, in our experience so far. And I think there's huge value that you can get from a CDP, almost uncapped, because it's just another system or tool that's really driving that cross-channel capability, and hopefully improving that dynamic personalization that you're trying to do. So it's a process that businesses can follow to iterate on and build out this continual developed experience for the customer, and therefore I really do think it has uncapped value. But
when you say uncapped value, so it's not necessarily a sort of creating whole new sets of value as such, it's more that it's a progression, enhancement and improvement on what a business could do pre-CDP, right? So by being more personalised, it's allowing you to get better conversion rates, potentially upsell better to customers, potentially reduce your marketing spend, right, by actually identifying who people are, who the high value customers are, and people you may or may not want to retarget, right? So it's around progression of that as opposed to just like this new pot, right, of value.
Correct, yeah. I mean, ultimately, it's just something that's bringing to get data together and then pushing it out to other systems. It itself isn't a magic solution that you turn on and suddenly, it's capable of, doing all of these amazing things.
And that right there, in lies the problem, potentially,
yes.
right, is that's the way it's sold.
Yes, yeah.
And that's why it goes wrong, maybe, or a reason why it can go wrong?
I think so. I think there's a lot of positioning from sales teams of vendors, of all types of technology solutions, but we definitely see it in the CDP realm as well, where it's a completely non-technical resource that can build and manage and run this new system to drive all of these very impressive capabilities for insights and activation. But in reality, really, there really is that requirement for a technical resource that can deliver and implement and continue the running of the system, but also a more strategic resource that kind of fully understands the capabilities and can build out a strategic long-term roadmap of activity that ultimately is going to be, as you say, an iterative process for providing a better customer experience over time, and just continue to do that with the individual teams that are actually the experience delivery teams across all of the touch points that businesses will use.
And how much of a problem do you think that potentially is as well, to bring all of those teams together to operate on a unified methodology, I suppose, because they're going to be used to dealing with their own individual challenges, right? Digital marketing going to be probably focused on improving the return on advertising spend or the cost per acquisition. CRM are going to be focused on re-engagement, retention. Then you've got product teams who are going to be focused specifically on kind of how well their component is performing, right? So taking them to the next stage. How is that one of the challenges as well, bringing all those people together?
Yeah, I actually think it's probably one of the most key considerations within the CDP is that internal business alignment.
Right. But that's not related to the tool, though. Right?
No,
that's people.
Exactly. Yeah,
right.
People and the management of those people too.
Careful what you say.
Just making sure that ultimately CDP is a large investment. It's giving a business a lot more capability or potentially just a lot of enhancement on existing capabilities. But it is a tool that is going to allow teams to do more personalization, cross-channel, everything else we've just spoken about. But without that business alignment, for example, board level, C-level members of the business setting unrealistic targets, unrealistic timelines, can obviously cause a conflict in how teams focus on trying to get value from a CDP, because actually then unsure of the definite impact that this new activity might drive, and therefore we've seen it before, people going back to BAU activity because they can at least guarantee some short-term immediate effectiveness and impact with the work that they do. And then again, trying to bring together this cross-team initiative really does require an individual or a team that's seeing this long-term strategic roadmap of activity and helping to orchestrate across teams, across platforms, within all of these different data sets that they're now bringing together to get the most value from it. But that's certainly not something that just happens, and I think that's a really important point as well, the fact that before considering a CDP, it's important to consider what are teams individually doing currently and how are they working together prior to a CDP investment. And if none of that's happening, a CDP isn't going to help that at all. It really needs a plan for processes and people and resources to help drive valuable activity from the CDP.
So do you feel that all organisations should be looking at the advent of a CDP as a kind of reward for the level of maturity they've achieved up until a certain point, right? So they've kind of got as far as they can with what they can do with device-based personalisation by getting the teams to operate together for a single shared vision of customer experience, right? Really start to build the foundation for that and prove the value there, and then look at how a CDP can enhance that, as opposed to it being this like parallel path that's going to auto-magically fix a bunch of problems.
Yeah, I think so. I think that ultimately it's a new investment. It needs a business case to be built around it, and where none of that activity is happening, I mean, you're basing it with a finger in the air, for the
Yeah.
impact that the CDP can bring in, at least it's a much more straightforward investment case to the business for
Yeah.
going towards, to buying a CDP. If you've been carrying out some of that activity or maximising at least the existing technology stack with the existing data that you already have to achieve some of that. And again, as we've just touched upon, I think it helps develop having those processes developed of team, these cross-team initiatives and knowledge sharing and this culture of test and learn and iteration of that. Those activities are all parts of the process that are key to making the CDP implementation successful.
Yeah, okay. So it's quite a minefield of stuff we've gone through today, things that can go wrong, things you need to think about. What resources have we got that we can give to our listeners, our readers, that will help them? Obviously, we're going to give this to them free of charge. I'm not going to restrict this, but what have we got? What kind of things are going to help them?
Yeah, so we've got, I wrote a small series of blog articles touching on things like data validation, ID unification, use case planning, and a few other topics that we've looked at. And so those are all available on dmpgteam.com. So take a look through those. We've got our brains. So if anyone wants to have a discussion, we've developed so much knowledge over the years now on individual CDP vendors, but of course all of the strategy and implementation work that we've carried out with clients over time.
People don't have to come on camera either to have that conversation.
No, exactly. Okay, yeah, good. Happy to have private conversations about those. But internally we have summaries of vendors and capabilities. We have scoring available as well, and so happy to share that type of resource as well.
And that's scoring against all the kind of key components within certain CDP platforms, right?
Correct. Key features, I suppose, and areas that you should be considering when running through an RFI or RFP type process.
Yep.
Also comparing vendors against each other. So internally, again, we have an idea when we're speaking to prospects or clients, what is going to be a more suitable vendor for them at in that period of time, to make most of the technology. I think the last resource that we have is actually an RFP questionnaire.
Right.
So we put together quite a large document to help customers use those questions to help validate requirements of the individual CDP vendors, and that's available through us. So it's linked to in one of the blog articles, but obviously reach out to us directly and we can share that.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So anything else you wanted to add to this session?
I would say that over the years we've predominantly worked with off-the-shelf solutions in the CDP world. But we haven't really touched much on the sort of DIY build your own CDP. And what's your opinion of those? And do you see DMPG kind of moving more into that space as well?
I definitely like the idea of them, right? Because conceptually, you could build something that is very, very specific to your use case, right? And that's one of the things that we see with other vendors is we're always mapping to a customer-specific use case, and you are taking something and adapting it, so therefore it's not always going to be 100% perfect in terms of what you want. You might have to do a lot of customization on it anyway, and hypothetically you could build something for your specific need. But in reality, given how difficult we have seen it be for customers to even take the off-the-shelf solutions and orchestrate their organizations around using it, agree on use cases, build out workflows, and actually get substantial value from these tools. Yeah. I think if you look at that and think, right, well, now map that into an environment where, in theory, anything's possible, right? You could go in any direction. It seems like in most cases, not in all cases, but in most cases, you're probably asking for trouble in terms of it being not just a sort of an issue from cost. I think actually that's not so much, it's the time. It's the time investment that you could spend trying to kind of build all these things and never really get anywhere. Whereas in reality, what actually a client is probably much better doing is taking something off the shelf, having a good plan for it, working with a partner that's actually done this before, right?
Yeah.
Not just us, but
Yeah.
actually, has actually done this and like properly gives a shit about how that's going to get delivered to the customer and not just charge them a lot of money. Right, work with them. And then if they can get the value from that, then start thinking about what is the next stage, right? And actually building something potentially that is specific to their business that can then be scalable and extend out with them. And that's where I see we could actually support on that, rather than coming up with our own solution, right, which will always be just out of date, or it'll always be specific to one particular use case. Is supporting our clients actually with their maturity and progressing their value from it. I think that's the way it's going to work for us anyway.
It seems so important. Again, to an earlier point, it's a iterative, long-term process. It isn't a solution we turn on and hope it just delivers a load of value on an ongoing basis with minimal maintenance. So, yeah, that makes total sense. I think, it's an interesting concept for your own build, but in reality, quite a difficult one to really support on.
For a lot of businesses, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, well, that's us for today. Thank you very much for watching, listening, reading. Hit us up if you need to get hold of those resources. Will and I are always happy to help.